Hello there and welcome to the fourth part of the How to Create a Landscape series. In this video we are gonna be spreading foliage across the landscape, which we did last video. Now the main differences you see is obviously that it's blue now and I added a river. In a moment I will tell you how to do that and show you the materials. In this video it's not gonna be automatic foliage, but simply spreading foliage with the foliage tool in the modes. And in the next one I will show you how to add foliage to the landscape material so it spawns automatically. To create a river, what you need to do is go into Settings, Plugins, search for water, enable it, and it will ask you to restart your Unreal Engine, and basically you are done. And then at the Place Actors tab, you just search for water and drag it into your scene. Now, in my opinion, it's a bit still buggy. As you can see it here, it's not spawning the water. Oh, and it's important to enable edit layers when you are creating the landscape so that it can edit the layers, obviously. Now, basically the difference between the previous material and this blue one is that I just replaced the texture blending with a simple color blending. And that's what adds the layers. That's literally the only difference between the two materials. Now you see I have a couple of types of foliage here, which is I made for the blue scene. Except for the grass, I stole it from an interactive grass tutorial a while back. And I will show you in a moment how to actually create foliage asset from static mesh, because they are a bit different. The green underline is foliage, the blue is just a static mesh you can set up as a foliage like this. So to create that, here I have a static mesh called SMRock2. Now this is not yet a foliage, it's just static mesh. Right click, go to foliage, right above FX, and just create a static mesh foliage. Name it whatever you want, open it, and right at the top there is mesh, where you can just choose the static mesh. I am gonna choose the rock asset I just showed you, the static mesh one. And now you can set a multiple values, like I already disabled cast shadows for performance issues. You don't have to do that, it's just that I'm working on a quite old school rig. You can set the call distance, which basically controls how far should the foliage spawn from you. You can set actually height, that you don't want it spawn above a certain height. I set it to 15,000, though my landscape doesn't reach that height, so it doesn't matter. And there's the exclusion volume, which is gonna be important later on, because you can set layers where you don't want the foliage to spawn, like grass, rock, or path, as I'm showing here. You can just type the name of that layer to the exclusion, and it won't spawn it on that layer. And now we have a foliage asset. Now if we go to modes and select foliage, you can just drag and drop the foliage you want to spawn. I will just paste in my foliage. And here are further settings, for example density, that how much of these foliage do you want within a certain radius. You can set the scaling. If it's uniform, you basically set the minimum and the maximum scale. In my case from 0.5 to 5, because that will give me a pretty good variety. And you can paint it on your landscape however you want. Now if you press Shift or hold Shift, it's gonna jump to the Erase tab, so you can erase the foliage you spawned, and if you release it, it will go back to paint mode. Yeah, I will just delete it and choose my foliage, which I intended for this blue scene. You can of course drag and drop multiple ones. These ones I've already used, so I have already set the density. For the grass I want 500. I've already set the scaling which I want, and of course I disabled the shadows and set the path as the layer that I don't want it to spawn on. Now I will just check all of them, zoom out and set my brush to a big size, and I just start to paint over my landscape. I drop in a player start playing, and I have painted my landscape with foliage. And as you can see, the path is excluded from the foliage spawning, but sadly the river was not. But I will just zoom out and set the radius and erase on the line of the river. It's obviously not a very good solution with a gigantic landscape, but this one is a really small landscape, so it's a short operation. And I already have my foliage. You can see in the background the culling distance working, because only a few trees are appearing in the distance. That's what culling does on the foliage. So what I'm gonna do now is select the select mode, and I will just raise the atmospheric fog a little so it looks a bit better. That actually helps with frame rates because it doesn't have to render too many things in the distance. I mean, you can fine-tune it so that it hides in the distance well enough so that the culling isn't that visible. Looks a bit better now, but I am just gonna fine-tune the culling a little bit more. If you have multiple types of the same foliage, like I have with trees, you can set different culling distance for them, and that will help make the culling appear less drastic. So for example here, I will set the cull distance to a different value than the rest, so from 10 to 20,000, and you will see on the landscape that more trees appear in the background, and it already looks a lot better to me, the background. Well, you can really badly see the grass as it appears, but if you have a bit more powerful machine, it won't be a problem. So I will just change the landscape material and erase all of the previous foliage. You can see in the foliage tab as the numbers decrease to 0. Now what I want to do is select all of them, and I can uncheck them at the same times. And I will go into my other foliage folder, which I have created for this specific landscape, drag them in, select them, and check them at the same time. Of course I could delete the previous ones, I just didn't do it, because if I want to switch between the materials, it's gonna be a lot easier to handle. Paint the whole landscape again. Erase the river. So here it is. This is the other landscape material with a bit more realistic assets. Now, truth to be told, these trees are more props than foliage, so they might not appear too natural because they are set up to be props, not foliage. But I think they complement this sort of landscape well enough. So thank you for watching, and in the next video we are gonna talk about how to create the foliage automatically with the landscape material so you don't have to paint it. Until then, see you next time.